All right, welcome everybody. So my name is Jordan Beck, and I am the coordinator with the UHN Office of Research Trainees, and I'm really excited to welcome you all here today for our Exploring Careers in Biotech panel. We have a really great lineup of speakers here with us today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the sacred land on which the University Health Network operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was the subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this territory. I would like to encourage you all to scan the two QR codes that are on the right-hand side of the screen. So on the top is a link to learn more about the land which you are currently located on if you're not in Toronto, and the bottom link is to learn more about Canada's Indigenous history. I'll give a couple moments to capture these links, and then I will move forward. I would like to share another event that we do have coming up later on this week. So on Friday, our office, so the ORT, and the UHN Postdoc Association are hosting an event with Dr. Nana Lee from the University of Toronto, and it's titled After the Postdoc, How to Prepare for Any Career. So you can join us in person at the Princess Margaret Hospital to learn how to market yourself and network into your dream career. We'll pop a link into the chat for some more information and to register for the event. Now, just a few housekeeping notes. We do ask that you please remain muted and keep your videos off during the presentation portion, or the discussion portion, excuse me. There'll be a lot of time at the end where you can ask all your questions, and you can do that by submitting your questions to Slido. You can go to slido.com and input the code 2340676, or you can follow the link that'll also be found into the chat. You're also encouraged to ask your questions out loud as well if you prefer. Today's event is being organized and conducted in accordance with the ORT's Code of Conduct. So we do ask that you please follow that, and any non-compliance will result in removal from today's event. And last but not least, your feedback is really important to us, and so we do encourage you to fill out our feedback survey. It's accessible through the link on the screen, so you can save that for later, or there'll also be a prompt that'll be generated when you exit the Zoom meeting in a web browser. Zoom has many accessibility features available to people taking part in Zoom meetings and events just like this one today. One of these features available to you are captions, which can be enabled by clicking the Show Captions button in the bar at the bottom of the Zoom window. Caption settings can be edited and adjusted to your personal preferences by clicking the up arrow on the left of the Show Captions button. Excuse me. You have the opportunity of adjusting font size, color, contrast, and many other things. Additional accessibility features that Zoom offers can be found by clicking the link in the chat or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Now it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our four panelists here today. We have Antonia Dubois, a senior research associate at Deep Genomics, Dr. Kevin Robb, a scientist at Stem Cell Technologies, Thanuka Thanabalasingam, a technical lead for data standardization at Benchside, and Dr. Dara Lowe, a business systems analyst at Amgen. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and we'll just jump right into the questions. Here we go. So the first question is, could you please introduce yourself a little bit further, talk about your education and training, and your role? I'll just start at the top of my screen, and we'll start with Antonia.
Sure. Hi. So, hi everyone. My name is Antonia Dubois. A little about my education and training. I did my Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph in molecular biology and genetics. My course focus was on kind of virology and infectious diseases, but my research focus was on mapping regulatory pathways in cancer cells. So that was really interesting. I then went on to pursue my master's at University of Toronto in molecular genetics, where I did research in drug discovery against treatment-resistant fungal pathogens. So again, with my kind of infectious disease passion there. After my master's at U of T, I then moved into my current role, which is a senior research associate at Deep Genomics, where I'm in research development, exploring kind of the RNA therapeutics field in a way that marries experimental biology with AI. So I do the experimental biology side, and I'm really excited to answer more of your questions.
Awesome, thank you. Next on my screen is Rob, or Kevin, excuse me.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin. My pronouns are he, him. Um, I'm a UHN alumni, so I'm really excited to be back and speaking on this panel. I recently completed my PhD in biomedical engineering at U of T, working in the lab of Samya Viswanathan at UHN and was co-supervised by Rajiv Gandhi. I was working on improving mesenchymal stromal cell therapies for knee osteoarthritis. Prior to that, I did my undergrad in physiology at McGill University, and I also completed a master's in biomedical engineering at Western University. My current role, I'm a scientist at Stem Cell Technologies. I started recently in February earlier this year. So I'm about 9 months into my role, so it's still pretty fresh, but happy to chat about how the transition has been so far and sort of how I got into this role. In my current role, I'm working on the mesenchymal team at Stem Cell, and my role is focused on designing and developing media products and workflows that will help accelerate research in the MSC field. So again, happy to answer more questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Next, I'll pass it over to Thanuka.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everyone. My name is Thanuka. I did both my bachelor's and my master's at U of T. My bachelor's was focused on human biology, focusing on health and disease. My master's was through the Institute of Medical Science. During my master's, I was working on developing out these three-dimensional culture systems to help mature out lung stem cells so that we can use them for, future purposes in transplant. During my master's, I started taking programming courses and got really excited about big data, especially as I was working with some proteomics work. So, um, using this sort of new passion, I kind of followed sort of like the AI trend and found myself in at BenchSci, which is a biomedical AI startup. The goal of BenchSci is to be able to help train machine learning models and AI to be able to read papers like a scientist would, so that scientists are able to gather insights a lot more quicker than traditional PubMed searches. And right now in my current role, I serve as a technical lead and as a product owner. So I help build out some bioinformatic knowledge graphs and databases that will then be used, integrated with LLM powered insights to show up on our applications. So really excited to talk about sort of this transition into tech with everyone here. Looking forward to the questions.
Awesome, thank you. And lastly, Dara.
Hey everyone, my name is Dara Lowe. In 2019, I graduated from my PhD in molecular genetics at U of T. Current day, and for the past 3 years, I worked for a pharma company called Amgen. I work in the research arm of the R&D program, and then specifically, I sit in information systems. So just wanted to elaborate a little bit more on what that means. So Amgen really specializes in every part of the drug development pipeline, from research discovery of novel drug targets, candidate molecules, all the way through development, so meaning clinical trials, to commercialization. So bringing that novel therapeutic to market for the first time. So a big part of that drug pipeline is research and development, or R&D. Then I sit at the very beginning in research, you know, there's a big process that happens, and I'm at the start of it. And then there's my department, information systems. So I didn't know anything about IS before I started working at Amgen, but the role of IS, and this is true across all industries, is to provide the right tools, software, technologies to enable data-driven decisions. And so what that looks like for me, I in the role of a product owner, I lead a team of software developers to build out tech solutions to enable our researchers at Amgen to be able to perform their science.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those great introductions. Just wanting to build off more now on your roles a little bit more. So the next question is, what does a typical day at work look like for you? I know maybe not all roles have typical days, but just kind of what are some of the things that you do day to day, or what does that variation look like? So maybe I will start with Thanuka.
Course. Yeah, so you're right. There's no real typical day, but for the most part, being a lead and a product owner, you are working with the team and helping them decide what should we work on and when should we should be working on. And in order to be able to make those decisions correctly, you need to be consulting with your stakeholders, who are people who have vested interest in what you're trying to deliver. So this could be like the sales team. This could be a downstream, team that's using like a knowledge graph that we're building. And so I find lately, which is not something I'm very enthused about, I'm sitting in a lot of meetings, probably like 5 to 6 hours, throughout the day. And then in between, I try to use the time to if I have to do any QA, so quality assurance on any of the things that have been built, any of the data products coming in, if I have to do any discovery on should we ingest a net new source to bring into our databases, really trying to fill in the gaps for the development team to see what we should be working on, how are things that we're working on progressing and performing. So a lot of meetings, and you try to squeeze in some focus time here and there.
Well, thank you. Next, I'll move over to Kevin.
Hey, yeah, so I would also say I don't really have a typical day from day to day. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things that I work on. Given that I am fairly new in the role, I inherited some projects that were worked on by previous team members, but also had the opportunity to start some of my own projects. So early on, I would say I was spending quite a bit of time on sort of brainstorming, thinking about new projects and potential like product development ideas, and had a lot of back and forth with my supervisor on that. So that involved a lot of sort of literature review and a bit of market analysis, and sort of having a good understanding of my field and what the pain points are, and how you could develop a product that could help researchers address those pain points. Um, Having said that, primarily my role involves a lot of lab work. So I'm at the bench running experiments most of the time. So about 4 days a week, I'm spending at least a bit of time in the lab running experiments. But that, of course, also comes with a lot of time spent on designing experiments and also analyzing the data, interpreting it, um, and then presenting as well. So there's a number of presentations that I will give in different research update meetings. And so I think a lot of those activities are actually similar to some of the work that I was doing during grad school. Some major differences are, um, an expectation to have things a little bit more time bound. So my team, generally, we work about a 9 to 5 schedule. And so you need to sort of prioritize tasks and schedule things so that they fit within that schedule. And yeah, I think I'll leave my answer there for now.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I know the time is tricky sometimes. I mean, 9 to 5 seems like a lot of time, but I think sometimes you blink and it's over, especially with like those days that are full of meetings, like Nico was mentioning. Um, Next, I will pass it over to Dara.
So, a typical day for me, I want to set the stage a little bit by providing a little bit of context about the company that I work for. So, Amgen is a fairly remarkable pharma company. We are publicly traded, headquartered in California, but we are global. We employ around 25,000 people across the entire world. And what this means is that for my role, where we are building tech solutions, these solutions need to be at scale and they need to be in the cloud. And so, what that could look like is, moving terabytes worth of data every day from labs all over the world off of lab instruments into the cloud, onto electronic lab notebooks. And then part of my department's scope is that we need to be able to find the right solution, whether that's an off-the-shelf software. Maybe we custom build that in-house for our scientists to be able to do their analyses, visualizations, anything like that. So very much like Sanuka, as a product owner, I play a dual-facing role. I partner with both the scientists, so they are our stakeholders, the people that we are trying to empower, to understand their gaps, their pain points. And then I bring that back to my team, who are the software engineers, the developers, and we can either go out and find a vendor that maybe can provide that tool off the shelf, or we have to, actually code that from the ground up, from making the front end from scratch, connecting that to the back end in all of our repos across the company at massive scale. So very similar to Sanuka, exactly the same. I am in meetings all day, every day, problem solving. And so whether that is communicating to our scientists, managing their expectations, the timelines, and the deliverable. And then also heads down working with my development team to solution, how are we going to get them the things that they need, and in a way that is, user UI and UX friendly, intuitive, and meets their needs, right? We never want to be making their life harder. We're always trying to make their life easier. So that's pretty much what a typical day looks like for me.
Very cool. That's very cool. Um, and next, Antonia.
Yeah, so my typical day, I'm gonna follow kind of the pattern here of saying that it changes a lot day to day. I think my job probably looks closest to Kevin's, in that I'm doing a lot of bench work, I'm doing a lot of experimentation. It's not altogether dissimilar from maybe any sort of wet lab academic research that people might have done in a master's. So there is a lot of standing at the bench. On heavy days, it might hit the ground running at 9, and then you leave at 5 after shutting everything down. But then there are also a lot of light days where it's a lot of computer focused stuff. I do have a hybrid job, so if it's just computer work, I can do it at home. So all of my data analysis can happen at home, which is very nice. And yeah, so it's a lot of planning research, planning projects, executing those experiments, analyzing data, then presenting data. And there is also a good, healthy amount of meetings as well. So, meetings with project managers, meetings with other people on my team. I work in assay development primarily. So, there's a lot of brainstorming, there's a lot of idea generation, and then also a lot of meeting across departments as well. So, meeting with software engineers and meeting with our director of chemistry and that sort of stuff. So people of different backgrounds, all collaborating kind of on one project. So yeah, I think that's kind of a general idea of what my days can sometimes look like.
Awesome. Thank you. That's like no matter the role, there's always a lot of meetings. Um, Now moving on to the next question. So just looking more, I guess, at the career path, the transition from your graduate, excuse me, bit of a tickle, from your graduate program into your careers now. Can you just describe how you became interested in this field? What what prompted you to look for this type of role? Or was there, and then I guess two parts. Was there something specifically in grad school that sparked this interest, and perhaps like through an extracurricular or an event or something like that? I'll start with Dara.
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces that I want to talk about for this question. I'll tackle the career in biotech part first, and then the second part will be giving a little bit more insight into IS and this kind of role that I'm in now, even though I'm not trained for it. So I started as my training is, wet lab bench scientist. I did my PhD in a yeast lab, so foundational science kind of research. Um, at the end of my PhD, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, for me, it was very much about still being very passionate and interested in towards advancing science, um, you know, having some kind of impact. Um, and with that kind of feeling, I felt like I needed to be a part of something that was a bit bigger than myself, that had a little bit more firepower behind it. And so I think that was kind of the transition into this industry where, it could, be something that I was still aligned with the mission, but maybe a little bit faster moving. In terms of IS, this was a brand new role to me, product ownership, software development, things like that. I play a non-technical role, which means I do a lot of the soft skills of, project management, talking to the scientists, understanding the science and their needs, and then relying a lot on my team to be able to, fill the roles of the very technical requirements and things like that. But the more that I learned about it, the more that it just made sense to me, right? In terms of these big organizations, this need, this whole department that fills this role between, you know, hard IT, people doing sysadmin work and things like that, and the scientists. And there's this gap where, people need to be able to, maybe use the cloud to do their analyses or, BenchSci or, electronic lab notebooks. And so there's an entire departmental mandate just for that. And I've really enjoyed all the opportunities and growth.
Excuse me. Awesome. Thank you. Next, back to Antonia.
Sure. So my career path, just to start there, and then I'll go into like what sparked the interest for biotech. My career path was a bit unconventional in that I started my education in the arts. I was in theater, fine arts, classical studies, that sort of stuff. And I had these kind of two pillars that I was interested in, which was the arts and then the sciences. And I slowly started to realize that the arts was something I could do as a hobby, and science was a little harder to do as a hobby. So I made the transition into science full time. And so that was kind of a big decision that cemented this area of research for me. And then molecular biology came as I focused kind of more into coursework. As I got into academia, in terms of when there was a moment that kind of sparked the interest in going into biotech, I figured out pretty quickly into my graduate studies that academia wasn't for me. I was on track to do a PhD, but I actually made the decision to take a master's instead because I just realized it wasn't my environment. It wasn't where I wanted to be. I wasn't altogether happy. And I think there were a couple reasons for choosing biotech. One was that I wanted to participate in scientific research that had a more tangible downstream effect. So the goal of publishing wasn't really super fulfilling to me. And I found that the goal of getting a drug to market was a lot more exciting. And so the place that I found to do that, obviously there are exceptions, but for me, it was a very logical choice to move into private biotech. Um, and that was always something very important to me and is something that I find very fulfilling currently in my job. And then the other kind of reason for moving into biotech was honestly lifestyle choices. So I enjoy the work-life balance. Kevin talked about 9 to 5. It is very nice. Pay tends to be higher than in academia. And I like collaborating also with a lot of different areas of expertise. And so those all kind of made it a bit of a no-brainer for me to move into biotech specifically.
Really great. Thank you. Kevin?
Okay. Yeah, this is a great question about sort of the career path and how I became interested in my current sort of uh, came to my current role. I could probably talk about like this for probably like 20, 30 minutes. So I will try and keep my answer concise, and I can piggyback now on Antonia and Dara's answers. So when I started my PhD, I was really focused actually on staying in academia. I eventually wanted to do a postdoc and run my own lab. So I was really interested in the science, and I still am. But sort of through the process of doing my PhD, I realized that, staying on this academic path was maybe uh, not the right decision for me, based on a number of factors. I think Antonia and Dara hit on some of those already. So work-life balance is one. Another was I care a lot about sort of the location that I'm able to live and work in. And landing that sort of final academic position, I knew that I would have to be flexible about where I was going to be working. Um, so that sort of realization came midway through my PhD, and then I went through a period where I was like very uncertain about what I was going to do next. Next, I was also struggling with burnout during that time. So really, I think I was focused on like getting the PhD done, and then worry about what comes after. After that PhD was done. So I took some time after my PhD. I took a bit of time off, and then I returned to the same lab that I did my PhD in, and did some part-time work there while doing like a lot of soul searching, scheduling informational interviews, and starting to apply for jobs. Um, and at that time, I was also applying for three different types of roles. So one was sort of bench scientist type roles. Again, I was really interested in the science still, and recognized that I could have an impact in this type of role through product development, for example, and creating tools that researchers need in order to answer those important research questions. And then I was actually also applying for more writing type roles, so scientific writing roles. I became really interested in writing throughout my PhD and was writing for blogs and had sort of side positions throughout my PhD where I was able to work on that. And then also journal editor roles, again, because I really liked reading and writing. Um, and so I actually interviewed for all three types of roles, and I happened to uh, learn a lot more about those roles through the interview process, actually. I happened also to make it the furthest in the interview rounds through these more bench scientist type roles. And so I landed this role a little bit out of serendipity, but I'm happy to be in this position. Again, I'm able to work on the science that I find really exciting still, and I can still do a lot of writing activities on the side, partly in my role and also outside of it. So I continue to blog for CCRM, for example, and have kept my fingers in the academic pies a little bit, and I'm still working on manuscripts and collaborations outside of my primary role. So I think it's sort of the best of both worlds right now for me. So yeah, hopefully that answer was concise enough, but again, happy to answer follow-up questions related to that.
Thank you. And lastly, Tanuka.
Yeah. If I look at sort of like my career so far, it's been like me being very like open and receptive to sort of like the information in front of me. Like I was not someone who had like a North Star that I was like continuously moving towards, which comes with its own pros and cons. I had chosen biology because that was what I was most excited for about when I was in grade 12. And then I decided to do, as a lot of us would have done, did a lot of like undergrad research opportunities, really fell in love with research, and then chose to stay in a department, the Institute of Medical Science, that my two former undergrad research mentors were part of. How I actually sort of even started thinking about tech was very serendipitous. Another master's student who had joined with me was taking this programming course that was offered to our department, so I decided to join her. And I really like took to sort of the logic, the syntax, and like it was like problem solving for me, which I really enjoyed. And I actually found myself in a bit more technical roles when I started at BenchSci. So I was doing a lot more like SQL and Python programming, more data analysis. But then as I was gaining more experiences at BenchSci, I realized that I actually like less doing the actual work, but helping guide how the work is done and what to work on. And that's what product ownership is. And so I would say like it's been very definitely not linear. And even like the decision to, I think, not continue forward in academia, but to kind of, exit at a master's was very much because of the pandemic. I was very similar to Antonia, where I was like, I think I was very close to doing the transfer exam, but the pandemic happened. And then I was like, let reevaluating decisions. And so there's been a lot of points in my career where I'm just absorbing a lot of information, and that does lead to a state of confusion at times. But I think to me, I feel like that's worked out because I've been receptive to a lot of opportunities that I otherwise would not have thought about.
Great. Thank you all so much for sharing that. Um, Time's flying, so I think I'm going to maybe jump down the list of questions a little bit. I'm going to move to the last one before we move over to the Q&A, because I see a bunch of questions coming through already on the Slido. So if you have any advice for someone looking into getting either just into biotech generally, into your career areas, or just any advice in general related to this topic, that would be great. Maybe I'll start with Dara.
Yeah, so I would say I have two pieces of advice. The first one I feel has been said a lot of times. It's still always about networking, and finding a mentor if possible. Um, when you come to networking, this could be, things that I did were just finding companies that whose mission, I felt like I was aligned with. I would go on LinkedIn, look at for similar roles that I was interested in, and then just cold message everyone I could to ask for a coffee chat. You get very few yeses, but if you don't ask, you don't know. And then when we talk about mentorship, right, it doesn't have to be, oh, formal, will you mentor me thing. If you just have a chat with someone once a month for 4 months, that's mentorship, right? And so I do find that people are, willing to say yes, are very kind, and, will be willing to donate their time to you. And then when you get into those networking opportunities, a lot of what you're trying to find out is kind of what this space I call you don't know what you don't know, and just trying to understand what are the other questions and things that you could be asking about. And through that kind of networking and mentorship, learning about the way things work, how companies work, how hiring works, how promotions work, budgets, what drives strategy and things like that. All of that I learned through networking and mentorships. That all happened actually later in my career. So, the more that you can do at the start and just put yourself out there, I really encourage. The second piece of advice I think that's really critical is valuing yourself, knowing what you're worth. Coming out of a PhD where you're paid peanuts, if you're paid at all, and then going into, the job market, any amount of money that your first job offers you feels like a lot of money. But once you get into it, you kind of look around, the first job. So I'm a big proponent of salary transparency. So I'll say some numbers and hopefully it'll come across as transparent and not me trying to toot my own horn. But, the first job that I got out of my PhD, entry salary was 50K. And that felt like so much money. But once you started doing the work and you could look around and see what the market actually looked like, you realize you're being totally underpaid. And then my second job was actually Amgen, and I was very, very lucky to be able to find a role there and get hired because that is a company that does value postgraduate degrees, and they will compensate you accordingly. And I doubled the amount of my salary just by making that jump. So I think it is really important and not obviously not all places value postgraduate degrees in that way, but what you have done and the training that you've achieved is valuable. And so fight for yourself.
That's really great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Kevin?
Okay, yeah, this is another question I could talk a lot about. But I think, um, yeah, something I would try to tell myself is that like it's okay to be uncertain, during your graduate training and beyond even. So not everyone has everything figured out. You do not need to have like a step-by-step plan. That's something that I think struggled with as someone who, has been very like academic driven and career focused. So, people I think seem to have everything figured out, and often that is not the case. So we're all sort of taking things step by step and trying our best. So I think that's something to remember. And then, yeah, I think related to Dara's point about networking. So this is something that I like was afraid to do, I think, during my PhD. Like I was networking, but I didn't really consider it as networking. So I was involved in lots of different committees that is networking, but you can be a little bit more active about it during your PhD. Some advice that I received along, actually towards the end of my PhD was like, when you go to events like these or conferences, and you see someone who's saying something that their message is resonating with you, um, reach out to that person, like on LinkedIn, by email. You don't have to, or you shouldn't be coming to them like asking them for a job per se. But it's good to just reach out, tell them what you liked about what they said, what resonated with you, ask them if you can have a follow-up chat, and get some career advice, or ask them whatever sort of follow-up questions you had related to what they spoke about. So I think that's a little bit more of a tangible piece of advice maybe for networking, and something that I wish that I did more of while sort of trying to explore potential paths after my PhD. Yeah, wish I had done that, I guess, earlier.
Great, thank you. Next, Sanuka?
Sure. I want to mention it just because I don't think we can underscore enough how important networking is, especially if you're looking to transition into a new industry. Both Dara and Kevin have talked a lot about it, which I just also want to mention. I got my job through networking. It was, through a connection who had put me in touch with someone who I worked at Benchside, and I started chatting, and that's how I built a rapport with folks on the team, and that helped my interview process. But I think when you're thinking about transitioning out of academia into a new industry, definitely try to do a little SWOT analysis of yourself. Like, understand what are things that you're good at, what are things that maybe you may not gravitate towards, and definitely don't discount the soft skills. Like, none of like I studied lung regeneration, and I knew all these pathways that was very important for lung stem cell maturation, and none of that is like serving me in my current role as a someone who works at bench side. But the things that are serving me are my presentation skills, my ability to problem solve, communicate with others. Like I didn't realize how much of product ownership is stakeholder management, which is just getting to work well with people. So don't discount those things because honestly, those are the skills that will are the most transferable and can help you find success in other industries. And then when you're applying for jobs, especially nowadays, like LinkedIn or like their job description has so many bullet points, don't discount yourself. You don't necessarily need to fit all the requirements. Sometimes as you apply for more and more jobs, you'll understand what are the core requirements, some things you must have, but there's a lot of things that are nice to have that may not be explicit. And, don't discount yourself or self-reject. Let that, if there's a rejection, let that be from the other side. Apply for things, put yourself out there. It's definitely tough, so keep your chin up, but it's definitely worth it on the other side if that's what you want.
Awesome. Thank you. And Antonia.
I won't say networking because I feel like everything to be said about that has been said, but I'll just agree with everything everyone said already. My main thing, I think, in my experience, is be adaptable and don't get too attached to your science. So, in my sphere, we're very much a startup and things change very rapidly. And having passion for what you do is fantastic, and you absolutely should have that. But you have to be prepared to shift at a moment's notice. And like I have had sit downs where I've been on a project for 6 months. My boss sits me down in a routine meeting and is like, yeah, you're not doing that anymore. Start planning this project. Here's the proposal, go. Forget about the other one. It's shelved. And it doesn't really matter how much you liked it. It doesn't matter how cool you thought it was. You have to do the next thing. And so I think marketing that adaptability and your ability to pivot is very important. And I have found a very useful skill to have in just going with the flow. Having passion for what you do, but being flexible. And if the track changes, whether it's a whole project or whether it's an experimental condition, you might be approaching experiment day and someone says, yeah, you're actually going to triple what you're screening. Figure it out. And you have to be able to pivot very quickly. So I think that is a very good skill to develop, to focus on, and to market in interviews.
That's really great. I think maybe the one common theme I think I've picked up on and take away is networking is really important. Um, so I think next we'll shift gears now over to the Q&A submitted through Slido. There's a lot of great questions, so I'll try and um, tackle as many as we can. I'll just share my screen so everyone can see. But I will group the first couple of questions together since it's on the lines of the job application as well as the interview process. Um, so just generally, if it's possible to touch on what was the job application process like? How was the interview? And do you have any tips in terms of standing out in those processes? So it's a big question, but if we can, wouldn't mind commenting on that. Maybe we'll start with Kevin this time, not to put you on the spot.
Okay. Yeah, so interviewing one, I would say um it takes practice. I certainly, when I started interviewing for positions, I messed up some of my interviews. So I think practice ideally before you're actually in the interview situation, like there are resources available um for you to be able to do that. And that can help you um I think stand out, hopefully. Like you need to be prepared. And some of it is luck as well. So it's a combination, I would say, of being a good fit for the role and what they are looking for, which sometimes is well captured in the bullet points that they list on their job description, and sometimes it's not. So put in your applications, even if you don't think you're a perfect fit for a role. So I agree with, I think Antonia said that earlier. So fit for the role, a little bit of luck and being well prepared. Certainly, you know, ironing out those written application materials does help. Have a friend review them, ideally someone who's like, knows a little bit about biotech, or at least like the academic work that you've done, and make sure those are really polished. I think you're on mute, Jordan. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Um, if there's anyone else wants to take it, I don't, but I can also start. I can also call people out. I don't want to going, but maybe Antonio, do you have any comment on this question?
Um, I think the first comment I'll say is maybe to validate it, which is that it does feel like you're throwing your resume into a void and never hearing anything, and it can be very soul crushing. So if you feel it, that everyone else feels that too. It is okay, and it doesn't mean you're bad at your job. It doesn't mean you're not qualified. It's just the way it is. I think. I agree with Kevin. I think there is a good amount of luck, and I think having people read over your resumes, your application documents is really important. Ideally, if you can find somebody maybe like a PI or someone high up in research, maybe in your academic lab, or if you know anyone who's in industry, even if it's not an area you're interested in, I would get them to read it if you can, because industry resumes can tend to look very different from academic resumes. So I'll keep it short, but that's kind of my main piece of advice is if you can find someone in industry to read it, that can be very, very helpful. Um, and then also for standing out, I find just talking to people, like we said, networking, if people already have your name in mind, they're going to look for your application and it will be a lot more likely that you'll get eyes on it in the sea of 200, 400, 600 applicants that go for a job.
Thank you. Next, Dara, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for the job application process, really similar. So when it's that portal and you're just, submitting online to the robot screener, it can feel kind of awful. Um, the this job and the last job that I got were both on referrals. The first referral was luckily from someone in my cohort. But the second one was exactly kind of how I had mentioned before. I went on LinkedIn for the company, for the role that I was looking at. I messaged everyone. One person got back to me. I had already submitted my application to the portal, but the person who agreed to have the coffee chat with me actually pointed me to an open position on his team. They'd been looking to backfill a position that they were sorely lacking. And so, because I had talked to him, he let his manager know that I was coming. And I think that, went a long way for me. And so, I think it's again, right, the networking piece. Having someone know who you are goes a long way. And then for the interview process, right, that was still, I got my foot in the door. Um, at Amgen, I had 4 different interviews, so several rounds. Um, and the way that I prepared for those was lots and lots of preparation. So I like to use the STAR method, right? So you go online, you Google typical interview questions, and then you write out your answers: situation, task, action, result, right? You practice those answers, and then exactly like you said, Kevin, it is as much as you can prepare, and then a little bit of luck. So that's the most you can do, I think.
Great, thank you. And Danuka?
Yeah, definitely resonate with sort of the answers that have been given here. I'm a strong proponent of referrals, and when done right, there's a fine line. Like, don't just blanket ask someone on LinkedIn for a referral. It's very helpful if you can make that connection beforehand. If you're interested in a company, you follow their page, you talk to different people, and sort of build that rapport. And then when a job opens up, it'll definitely be helpful to like either get them to like ask them for a referral. The worst they can say is no. Or actually, this happened very similar story to what Dara said, where I was having a chat with someone and they were like, I think you'd be great for this role. And on the call had just put in a lever like referral for me and like without me asking, but building that rapport. So, that networking, communication skills are very important. The other thing is, I don't know how well in this may land, but like paying attention to those keywords in those in job applications, like maybe use Chat GPT, like put in the job description and say what are the key skills that they're looking for, what are the key things that should be in my resume. You obviously don't want to lie, so don't say you have experience in something if you don't. But if you can start sort of either yourself or with the help of someone or tools be able to pinpoint those things and make sure that your resume definitely has that. Don't apply with the standard resume. Try to tailor your resume as much as possible. I actually don't know if cover letters matter. Some folks say they do, some folks say they don't, but let's at least like with the resume make sure it's very tailored.
So thank you. I think I'm going to deviate slightly, just in the interest of time from what's on the screen. I'm just seeing a lot of similar themes popping up just with the last 7 minutes here. So one of the questions was specifically for you, Thanuka, but I think it's something that maybe I can ask the group entirely when it's looking at different courses or any upskilling that you had done either aside of from your graduate program or within your current roles. So maybe I'll start with Thanuka, but then I'll uh, move through the group. But is there any particularly programming courses or any upskilling courses that you did to help succeed in your role?
Yeah, and I definitely had this exact same question when I was trying to transition out into the field. So outside of the so I did there was a programming course, I think it was like biostatistics with R that was through the IMS. And as I was graduating, I was actually looking at boot camps and looking at different courses. However, a mentor at that time had just told me like, hey, some of the stuff could be predatorial. They're preying on you being desperate for a job or wanting to transition out. They cost a lot of money. I think the one that I was looking at was 10 grand, which for someone coming out of academia is not, well, was not sustainable for me. Look for courses and material that are online for free. So I think if you're part of the Toronto Public Library, you can get a LinkedIn Learning membership for free. There's a lot of really good content for programming as well as other courses there. And then a lot of times jobs will have a learning stipend. So once I got into BenchSci, I continued the University of Toronto, their School of Continuing Studies, like a data science certificate, but I did not pay a single dime for that. Like that was paid for by BenchSci as part of my learning stipend. And that made sense because like my manager vetted that course with me, making sure that the stuff that I'm learning will fall within, the role expectations. So I would say try to see if you can access information for free. There's a lot of stuff, especially with programming, that's online. It requires a bit more work, but then especially when we're in academia and budgets might be a little bit more tight, it might be the more feasible and realistic solution.
Great, thank you. So maybe Dara and Kevin, Antonia, do you have anything to touch on any courses or any upskilling that you've done?
I can jump in maybe really
Sure.
quickly. I didn't do a whole lot of courses, but in terms of ones I wish I had done,
Mhm.
looking back, I feel like depending obviously on what areas people want to go into, um, project management courses, I think can be very useful if you want to move upwards in the ladder within research, if you want to manage research. Yeah, getting any sort of PMP education can be really, really good, whether or not you actually get the certificate, because that costs money. So yeah, I think things like that, managing people, managing projects, there's a lot of courses that can teach that. And those are things I wish I had done. But also, like Thanuka said, a lot of jobs will give you some sort of amount of money if they think it's relevant to your career trajectory with that company. So, yeah, it's never too late.
That's great.
Yeah, I would echo what Antonia's saying and also what Danuka said. I think rather than trying to get all these certifications or paying for things, definitely leverage any free boot camps, coding courses um, that are available online. I think it's more about once you get that role, you'll see kind of what skills that they're asking for that maybe you need more of, and then hopefully they'll be able to, cover the cost of that. But unless it's something really specialized like reg affairs or medical science liaison, I don't know that it is strictly necessary to go out and get that certification before applying for the jobs. I would almost apply first. And then if you are getting a lot of no's, ask for that feedback to say, was there anything that you could have, would have helped if you saw that I was stronger in? And then maybe find that feedback that way.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just echo a bit of what Dara said. I think often hiring managers and recruiters are looking for a person who has a certain set of skills and not necessarily uh, they're not necessarily worrying about how you acquire those skills, provided that you can demonstrate that you have that expertise. And so, depending on what it is, maybe a specific course might be helpful, but maybe it's something that you could think about, like coding and programming, for example. You can apply that to your life sciences research, and maybe that's how in order to do that, you could have a discussion with your supervisor about how to incorporate that into an aspect of your project. Um, and of course, that would involve a lot more self-learning. So I think that's an individual decision, but I guess that's just something I wanted to highlight. It might matter about, not necessarily how you acquire the skill, but that you have the skill and that you're able to perform the task they are looking for you to do.
That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing that. I guess maybe we'll have to leave it at that question. I know I could probably sit here for another couple hours asking questions and discussing. It's been really, really great. But just in the interest of time, I think we'll end on that question. I'd just like to thank and join me in giving a round of applause, a virtual round of applause to our panelists, Kevin, Tanuka, Antonia, and Dara. Thank you so much for coming today and taking your time out of your busy days to joining us and sharing your insights and your journeys with us today. So with that, I will end off our panel and thank you all for coming. And just a reminder, please do consider filling out our feedback form. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
thanks so
you.
much,
Thanks,
Jordan.
everyone.
Thanks.